So going to look at CQC data on quality. So going to look at a couple of things. Firstly, local authority level data on quality. So it's basically looking at what the quality of CQC registered services is like within individual local authorities. Linked to that, some information on inadequate and outstanding services. Then looking at the number of inspections by month, and then looking at the outcomes of inspections. So what happens after CQC have been in, done an inspection, what happens to that service afterwards in terms of the rating it gets, range between inadequate and outstanding. Finally, quick look at quality and learning support organisations. This is based on a scoring process to work out what the overall level of quality is of CQC registered services within individual local authorities. So basically we give each location a score based on its CQC rating. So if it's outstanding, it gets 4. If it's inadequate, it gets 1 or something in between. We then add up all those scores for local authorities, look at all the locations within the local authority, add the scores up, and then divide that by the maximum score they get, which would be all outstanding. So for this example, total score would be 15. The maximum score they could get would be 20. So the score is 75. And actually 75% represents all good services. So that's probably more or less what CQC would like to see, is all services being rated as good with some outstandings. So that 75% gives a good sort of benchmark figure when you look at how local authorities are doing. So first bit is looking at that 75%. The red and orange are ones that are below 75%, and the green ones, which are a couple, which I'll show you, are the ones which are outperforming 75%. So you can see there, South Gloucestershire, Wigan and Kensington and Chelsea both get scores of above. So on average, their services are rated slightly higher than good. And Sunderland is the one which is on 75%. So that's the sort of the all good benchmark. So as with all these things, although the average is quite interesting, actually there's quite a lot of variance in the proportion of outstanding and inadequate services to make up those overall figures. So look at that now. So for outstanding services, between 0% and 15% of all services are classified as outstanding across the different authorities. And for inadequate services, less of a range, it's between 0 and 6%. So firstly, outstanding services. Darker the colour, the more outstanding services there are. So you can see there are 3 authorities at the top there. So South Gloucestershire, again, Windsor, Maidenhead and Plymouth, all with 15% of their services are rated as outstanding. At the other end of the scale, these are the ones, the inadequate ones. And again, there's a small selection of ones which are at the bottom end of the list there. So you've got Liverpool, Bracknell, Forest and Slough. I don't know why these two, which are right next to each other, scored so badly. And then the rest, you can see actually the majority of them, there aren't that many inadequate services. The most local authorities fit in that bottom category of between 0 and 1.2% of the service inadequate. The next bit is looking at inspection numbers. So what we found is that the numbers have started to settle down again, and showed a chart in a second. There's quite a large monthly variance, and this goes back to the issue that Tom was saying about the transforming care data. But there does seem to be a lag between the inspection report being published and it appearing in the data. And I'll cover that again in a moment. We've also have a quick look at the number of locations. So you can see here in the chart, these are the number of inspections taking place. And you can see there, clear trend. Pre-COVID, COVID, they more or less stopped doing inspections, and it gradually picked up again since. And it now seems to settle back down again to a very similar figure. But there is quite a large monthly variance, and I don't know why that is. It could be that they're busy doing inspections some month and they catch up with all their reports the following month and publish them all. And over this period, you can see that there's been a gradual increase in the number of services as well. So some of this increase might just be the overall proportion is very similar, but the number of inspections is gradually going up. We've looked at the information on the changing ratings, what happens after an inspection, a few times in the past. So what we do is look at all the inspections that take place between in 3 months from 1st of January to the 31st of March, and then look at how the results of those inspections compare to the previous inspection for those services. We're just looking at the overall rating for these services, not the individual realms within that. This sort of picks up one of the issues that what we've done previously, which showed much bigger shifts in the outcomes of inspections, is look at the results in the data published in April. So looking back over the previous 3 months. But what I did is actually, when I looked at the figures, actually the number of published reports doesn't look very high. So what seems to be happening is they don't always put the fact they publish a report in the data until quite a long time afterwards. What they seem to do, though, is if there's been a change in rating, they publish those reports much quicker than they do if it stayed the same. So when I was looking at the figures previously, I was looking at the data published in April, but it was missing the OK services because they hadn't published those ones yet. They just published the ones that had to shift. So when we reported this previously, it looked like there are much bigger shifts away from report outcomes staying the same to either side. What we've done is send the analysis to cover all years in 2019 so we can pick up a bit more and also try and address this issue about the missing inspection reports. It doesn't mean there are now 4.5 million inspection rows of data because each service has 6 inspection quality ratings for it, and they publish data once a month for all the services, so we end up with a very large amount of data. So looking at the care homes, non-care homes, old adult and working age, by region, and then by non-care homes and working age adults. So young adults, this is what happens in inspections going by year. So 2019, 94% of inspections resulted in no change, 5% improvement, and 1% went down. Then the pandemic came along, and all of a sudden, only 77% of inspections resulted in no change, and 23% resulted in a worse rating, and there were no going up. But running alongside this also, there were about 7 inspections took place then. And what CQC were doing is only inspecting where an issue had been flagged. So it resulted in the fact that an issue has been flagged, it's much more likely to result in a change of inspection rating. And what's happened is they gradually caught up again, so they've moved back to the normal cadence of inspections and away from the risk-based one. So gradually it's gone back up to all the inspections result, most of the inspections result in no change. And I think if you look at this again next year, I suspect that this figure will either stay very similar or will again reduce further. For older adults, very similar pattern, same thing. Pandemic, the inspections stopped. More inspections took place, but the same outcome. And again, same trends happening. It's gradually reducing again, although in this case, it's not reducing as much as it is for learning disabilities or for the working age adults. And these are all for care homes, incidentally. As always with these things, look at the national figures, but there's always a massive variance by region. So you can see, as always, this looks at the figures so this is April. It's the 1st of January to the 31st of March this year. So you can see North East, 95% of services for working age adults result in no change. Only 56% of the inspections in the East Midlands did, and 44% resulted in a reduction in rating. For older adults, again, similar pattern, but different range of authorities, of course. So North East is now, similar figure, but it's now Yorkshire and Humber who have the leads, and they're getting people improving instead. So this is looking at non-care home services for working age adults. You can see that actually, if it's not a care home, the ratings generally stay the same after an inspection. Even with the pandemic, there wasn't that much of a shift. But again, I think that's probably because they found it very difficult to inspect these services. So again, there were very few inspections actually took place, and where they did, there was no change. So when you look back at the overall figures, that's largely skewed by the fact that you've got care homes where there's much more likely to be a shift. And I suppose one question here would be whether this reflects the fact it's much harder to get a handle on quality in supported living services where people might be dispersed and you're relying on a more office-based inspection rather than going around a care home where the inspectors can pick up a problem with cleanliness or hygiene or the kind of things that generally result in poor ratings. So the third thing to look at is quality in learning disabilities locations. So looked at locations that are registered just for people with learning disabilities, aged 18 to 64. One of the difficulties here is that locations register for multiple client groups. So as well as being registered for people with learning disabilities, often registered for older people because you're able to support people with learning disabilities over 65. So actually it's quite difficult to pull out just people with learning disabilities. But what I've done is look at the services which only have a learning disabilities rating or only have a learning disabilities and older adults rating to try and pick out the providers who are more likely to be just doing learning disability services. But it does mean there are some generalist providers on this list who register for absolutely everything. And we've just looked at the larger providers. So these are ones that have been allocated a brand by CQC. So I think mostly probably treated as a brand by CQC. And that's quite useful as well because they group together different provider organisations which actually fall under one bigger provider. 89% of 89 of them, and quality is very consistent. So you can see here, this is the quality in these services going back 2019, and it's moved up by 0.7% over that time. A slight dip last year, when it went down 0.2%. But actually, overall, and again, this score is based on this 75% being good. In general, all these services are just over good. So, you've got a mix of good and some outstanding services. So, of these, 4 below 75% and 19 above. So, these are 4 below. Time Life, Home Farm Trust, so two private providers, 2 not-for-profits. And actually, even these figures aren't terrible. I mean, the Home Farm Trust 70%, and 274, so just below that 75% benchmark. The only difference would be Prime Life there. And these are the ones that fall in above the 75%. So you see, a few 76s. But at this end, some very high scores. I mean, that means they've got quite a large proportion of outstanding services in there. And the other thing is that quite a lot of them are private providers as well. So looking at over the period, so again, going back to the 2019 figures to this year's figures, what the change has been. You can see there, Prime Life, actually, they've gone down. So they're currently 67%, they've dropped 8%. Viability has gone down by 8% and it's still on 83%. So they've obviously lost some of the outstanding services. But overall, actually, people haven't dropped by very much. And actually, for these ones, they only just dropped down very slightly. And on the other end of the scale, you've got the ones that have increased. That wasn't such a good score because they're only on 75% now. In 2019, they're on 25%. So basically, their services were all rated as being inadequate. So they've also done quite a lot of work to get up to all good now. For the others, really, I mean, they've improved, but they're still within that sort of good band. I can see the final bit is asking who are the brands. So quite a lot of private providers in there. So, for example, we've got Salutum Bid Company Limited. And actually, this is who they are. These are made up of these are the providers which fall under this group. So what often happens with these is that these are the result of acquisition. So they buy the provider. They continue to run the provider under its divisional name. And you see that particularly with old adult services, that you get the same pattern. And this is active care. And they're very busy. They've got all sorts of things in here. And again, a few supported living services in this. And quite a few of these providers also do quite a lot of work in supported housing and the sort of the private supported housing providers where there's been quite a lot of focus in terms of housing benefit. That they provide shared housing where they claim quite high levels of benefit, housing benefit, although these won't generally appear in this list because people don't have care needs. So in conclusion, firstly, it does seem to be settling down again after COVID. So I think the sort of cadence of inspections and the outcomes of inspections report reverting back to the way it was before COVID came along. Of course, what we don't know is what the impact of the next round of changes within CQC's reporting regime is going to be, inspection and reporting regime is going to be, and whether that's going to shift this. Again, they're talking about having a more risk-based approach, but actually they're already doing that to some extent. So what we might see is that you may end up still having that slightly higher level of change as a result of inspection. Because if you've got a risk-based approach, you'd hope that after an inspection, there'd be some kind of change because the inspection is being triggered by a concern about what's going on. And they wouldn't be inspecting if they think everything's going to be the same as it was before. I mean, overall, for all services, and for learning disability services in particular, most services are good. And where there has been change, greater levels of change after inspections, that tends to be driven by a more risk-based approach. But across the country, there is that variance, as mentioned, and I think that's probably down to CQC's regional structure and the regional autonomy in setting inspection outcomes. We need to see, again, whether that changes next year and whether that's the result of either individual regions changing their priorities or the result of the new inspection regime, which should bring a bit more uniformity about how they inspect and what happens as a result of an inspection. And final bit, London Community Services very consistent with the greatest variance in care home provisions. And again, I do wonder whether some of that is because it is much easier to judge the quality of a care home than it is to judge the quality of a supported living service. And again, whether that will change as part of their updated inspection regime, which I think is intended to pick up some of these variances.